Most people imagine isolation as peace. No neighbors, no noise, no one watching. But isolation doesn't erase danger. It removes witnesses. When you live far enough from roads and cities, there's no one to hear what happens at night. No one to notice patterns forming. No one to question the things you slowly accept as normal. The woods don't announce themselves. They don't rush. They don't need to. They wait. The stories in this video aren't about monsters chasing people through the dark. They're about moments where nothing happens right away. Moments where the silence lasts just a little too long, where familiar places begin behaving differently. And once you notice something is wrong, you're already part of it. Tonight's first story comes from a couple who thought they had finally escaped the world. They didn't realize something else was already there. Story 1. We were never alone in those woods. We didn't move into the woods because we hated people. We moved there because we were tired of noise. For years, our lives had been shaped by things we couldn't escape. Traffic outside the window, neighbors arguing through thin walls, phones buzzing at all hours. Even at night, the city never fully went quiet. So when we found the cabin, it felt unreal. It sat deep in the forest, miles from the nearest town. No power lines, no cell signal, just a narrow dirt road that disappeared into trees. The realtor called it off-grid living and warned us it wasn't for everyone. That only made us want it more. The first day we arrived, the silence was overwhelming in the best possible way. When we shut the truck doors, the sound didn't echo, it just vanished. The forest absorbed it. The cabin itself was small but solid. One floor, a loft bedroom, thick wooden walls that smelled faintly of pine and age. It looked like it had been built to last. During the day, everything felt normal. Sunlight filtered through the trees in long, broken lines. Birds moved from branch to branch. The forest felt alive but distant, like it was doing its own thing and didn't care that we were there. At night, the darkness came fast. Without street lights or nearby houses, the world ended a few feet beyond the porch. Our flashlight beams cut narrow tunnels through the trees, but everything else stayed black. Still, we slept well those first nights. The quiet felt earned, the kind of quiet you only get when you've gone far enough. We spent our days settling in, fixing loose boards, clearing brush, learning how far sound traveled out there. We laughed more than we had in years. That should have been the warning, because after a while, we started noticing how quiet it really was. No distant engines, no dogs barking, no owls calling at night. Sometimes when the wind stopped, there was nothing at all, not even insects. Just silence so complete it felt deliberate. We told ourselves that's what isolation sounded like, and for a while, that explanation was enough. The first thing that changed wasn't something we saw, it was something we heard. Late one night, well past midnight, I woke up because the silence felt different, thicker somehow, pressed down against the cabin instead of drifting through it. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Not close, Not loud, just far enough away that I had to focus to hear them. Slow and steady, like someone walking carefully across uneven ground. At first, I stayed still, listening. The steps didn't rush, they didn't stumble. They moved with a kind of patience that immediately ruled out an animal in my mind. Deer crash through brush, coyotes scatter. Whatever this was knew exactly where it was going. I nudged my partner awake and whispered, "Do you hear that?" We lay there together, barely breathing. The footsteps circled the cabin once, then stopped. I waited for something else to happen, a knock, a voice, anything. Nothing came. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been the wind shifting branches or rocks settling in the cold. The explanation felt thin, but exhaustion won out. The next morning, everything looked normal. No broken branches, no disturbed ground. The forest looked untouched, exactly the way it had the day before. We laughed it off over coffee, embarrassed by how quickly our nerves had jumped. But that night, it happened again. This time, the footsteps were closer. They moved along the side of the cabin, slow enough that we could track their position by sound alone. Each step was deliberate, controlled, as if whoever was out there knew exactly how much noise to make. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The moment the door opened, the forest went dead silent. No footsteps, no wind, no movement. My light swept across the clearing, then into the trees. The beam stopped abruptly where the darkness swallowed it. I couldn't see more than a few feet in. There was no one there, no sign anyone had been. That's when the unease settled in. Not fear, uncertainty. A few days later, small things began to feel off. A hammer we'd left in the shed was resting on the porch railing. A chair that normally faced the door had been turned toward the woods. A coil of rope appeared neatly stacked beside the cabin wall. Each time we questioned each other. Did you move this? No. Did you? The answer was always the same. At first we blamed exhaustion. Living off-grid took more effort than we'd expected. Long days, physical work, early nights. It made sense that we might forget small details. But the pattern kept growing. Nothing was ever broken. Nothing was ever missing. Things were just repositioned. One afternoon, while clearing brush near the edge of the clearing, I noticed something in the dirt. Footprints. They were faint, like whoever made them had been careful not to leave a deep impression. The ground there was soft enough that animal tracks usually stood out clearly. These didn't. They circled the clearing, not toward the cabin, around it. I didn't say anything at first. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I didn't want it to be real. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. That's when the sounds changed. Instead of footsteps moving around the cabin, we started hearing movement just beyond the tree line, always just outside the reach of the porch light. Branches shifting, leaves rustling, something pacing us from the dark. Whenever we stepped outside, it stopped. Whenever we went back in, it started again. We stopped sleeping deeply. We started keeping the lights on longer at night. And slowly, without ever saying it out loud, we stopped thinking of the woods as empty. After a while, we stopped talking about what was happening. Not because it wasn't real, but because naming it felt like inviting it closer. Days passed where nothing obvious happened. No footsteps, no movement, no misplaced objects. On the surface, everything returned to normal. That was worse. The silence stopped feeling empty and started feeling attentive, as if the woods weren't resting anymore, as if they were listening. We found ourselves lowering our voices inside the cabin, even though there was no one around to hear us. At night, every sound carried farther than it should have. The crackle of the stove, the shift of weight on the bed, even breathing felt loud. Sleep became shallow. I would wake up in the middle of the night with the sense that something had changed, even if I couldn't say what. The cabin felt smaller somehow, the walls closer, the air heavier. One night I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard an animal. No birds at dawn, no insects at dusk, no distant howls or calls in the night. The woods weren't alive anymore. They were waiting. We started double-checking locks, then triple-checking. Still, the idea of safety felt thin. The door felt more symbolic than protective, a boundary that existed only because we believed it did. One evening, just before dark, my partner noticed something strange. The front door was unlocked. We stood there staring at it, both of us knowing the same thing at the same time. We never left it unlocked. There was no sign of forced entry, no damage, no scratches around the frame. It looked exactly the way it always had. That made it worse. That night, the footsteps came back, closer than ever. They didn't circle the cabin this time. They stopped right outside the wall. We could hear breathing, slow, controlled, close enough that it blended with the quiet inside the room. I counted the seconds between breaths, trying to convince myself it was my imagination, but my partner squeezed my hand harder each time it happened, confirming we were hearing the same thing. Then came the knock. Not loud, not urgent. 3 soft taps against the cabin wall, evenly spaced, intentional. We didn't move. We didn't speak. We barely breathed. The knocking didn't repeat. After a long stretch of silence, the breathing faded. The footsteps retreated into the woods. Morning didn't bring relief. The cabin felt violated, not broken into, entered in a way that left no marks, as if whatever had been outside knew it didn't need to force its way in. We checked every corner of the cabin, under the bed, in the loft, behind the stove. Nothing. But something had shifted. The woods didn't feel like a place we were visiting anymore. They felt like a place we were being tolerated. We started packing without discussing it. Clothes folded, supplies sorted, tools loaded back into the truck. Neither of us asked if we were leaving. We both already knew. Story 2. The Stranger Near the Cabin. I chose the mountains because I believed distance meant safety. Not the kind of safety that comes from locks or alarms, but the kind that comes from being forgotten, from living far enough away that no one has a reason to look in your direction. The cabin sat high above a narrow valley, surrounded by thick pine forest and steep rock faces. The road that led to it wasn't marked on most maps, just a long stretch of dirt and gravel that climbed steadily upward before ending without warning. No neighbors, no cell signal, no traffic noise. The first time I stood there alone, keys in my hand, listening to the wind move through the trees, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: relief. The cabin was old but solid, thick timber walls, a single bedroom, a narrow porch that overlooked the clearing. It didn't feel abandoned, it felt unused, like it had been waiting. The days settled into a rhythm quickly. I woke with the light, chopped wood, hauled water, fixed small things that had been ignored for years. At night, I cooked simple meals and sat in silence, listening to the forest change as the sun disappeared. The darkness came fast in the mountains. One moment there was color, the next only shape. At first, the nights felt honest. No distant sirens, no engines, no voices bleeding through walls, just wind and the occasional creak of the cabin as the temperature dropped. For weeks, nothing happened. That part matters, because when you tell people a story like this, they assume something went wrong immediately, that there was a warning sign you ignored, or a moment you should have turned back. There wasn't. If anything, the place encouraged me to stay. I began to notice how predictable everything was, the way shadows moved across the clearing at the same time each day, the way the forest quieted just before nightfall, the way the stars felt closer without city light washing them out. I stopped locking the door during the day. Sometimes I left it open while I worked outside, letting the air move freely through the cabin. Nothing ever went missing, nothing felt disturbed. That sense of normalcy made it easy to believe I was truly alone. The first time I noticed him, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a mistake. I was chopping firewood near the edge of the clearing when I caught a glimpse of something between the trees. At first, I thought it was a trick of perspective, a branch aligned just right, a shadow stretching where it shouldn't. Then it shifted, not stepping forward, not retreating, just adjusting. I stopped swinging the axe. There was someone standing at the tree line, too far away to see clearly, too still to be natural. I waited for him to move, to wave, to do something human. He didn't. I called out, my voice sounding thinner than I expected. "Hey!" The forest swallowed the word. No response. I took a few steps forward, the axe still in my hand. The moment I did, the figure turned and moved into the trees, disappearing without sound. No running, no panic, just gone. I stood there longer than I should have, listening for branches snapping or leaves shifting. Nothing. The forest returned to its quiet rhythm as if nothing had happened at all. That night, I told myself it had been a hiker, maybe someone lost, maybe someone curious about the cabin. The explanation worked. Until the next afternoon. The next day, I tried to convince myself I wouldn't see him again, that it had been a one-time thing, a hiker who wandered too close and slipped away the moment he realized someone lived out there. I went back to work like normal, split wood, carried it to the stack behind the cabin, checked the water line, the kind of chores that keep your mind busy, keep you from imagining threats in the shape of trees. By late afternoon, the light started to tilt. That's when I saw him again. Same place, same distance. He stood between two pines at the edge of the clearing, where the ground dipped slightly and the trees grew thicker. If you weren't looking directly at that spot, you would miss him. He didn't wave, he didn't shift, he didn't even seem to breathe. Just a tall, motionless outline. My first reaction wasn't fear, it was irritation. The mountains were quiet. That was the whole point. Whoever this was, he was interrupting something I'd fought hard to build.
I set the axe down and stepped forward. "Can I help you?" I called out. No answer. The figure remained perfectly still. I walked a few more steps toward him, not fast, not aggressive, just enough to make it clear I had seen him and wasn't going to ignore it. The moment I crossed a certain point in the clearing, he turned and slipped into the trees. Again, there was no sound, no crack of branches, no crunch of leaves. The forest should have made noise when a person moved through it. It didn't. He vanished the same way he had the day before, like someone lowering a curtain. I stood at the tree line, scanning the shadows. My heart was steady, my breathing normal. I expected to see him moving deeper between the trunks, but it was as if he'd never been there. That night, I locked the door, not because I truly believed he was dangerous yet, but because I felt something shift in my thinking, a small adjustment, the beginning of a new awareness. I started noticing the boundaries. The clearing was mine, the cabin was mine, but the trees around it didn't belong to me. The forest didn't feel like part of my property. It felt like a separate world pressing against the edges, waiting for the light to fade. The next morning, I found something that made it harder to dismiss. A cigarette butt, near the edge of the clearing. I didn't smoke. It was fresh enough that the paper still looked bright, not soaked or flattened by weather. And it wasn't random. It had been placed there where someone could stand behind the trees and watch the cabin without stepping into the open. I held it between two fingers for a long moment, staring at it as if it might explain itself. Hikers didn't usually do that, not out there, not that far from the road. They didn't stand in one place and watch a cabin. They didn't return to the exact same spot day after day. By afternoon, I was waiting for him. That thought bothered me almost as much as his presence, because it meant the cabin had already changed. The routine had already been interrupted. My mind had made room for him without my permission. When the light began to fade, he appeared. Same place, same stillness. This time, I didn't call out. I didn't approach. I stood near the porch steps and watched him through the open space of the clearing. Minutes passed. He didn't move. I realized something then. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there to confirm that he could be, like a reminder. I forced myself to walk back inside and close the door behind me. I didn't look out the windows. I didn't give him the satisfaction of knowing I was thinking about him after dark. But later, when I turned off the lights and lay in bed, I couldn't stop imagining that same shape out there, standing in the exact same place, staring at a cabin that was supposed to be invisible. Over the next several days, he became part of the landscape. Not constantly, not predictably, but often enough that the tension never fully left. Sometimes I would go 2 days without seeing him, and I'd start to relax. Then I'd step outside at dusk and catch that shape between the trees again, as if he'd never left. Each time he disappeared the moment I moved toward him, and each time it happened, the same question grew heavier in my mind. How was he leaving without sound? The forest floor out there was thick with pine needles and fallen branches. Animals made noise. Even the wind made noise. A person moving away should have disturbed something, but he didn't. It wasn't just silence, it was control. By the end of the first week, I changed my behavior without realizing it. I stopped working near the tree line late in the day. I started making sure my truck was positioned facing outward so I could leave quickly if I needed to. I checked the windows before turning off the lights, scanning the clearing as if the darkness might be holding him in place.
The first night I heard him, I didn't sit up right away. I woke because something had shifted. Not a sound, not a movement, just the sense that the silence had rearranged itself. The cabin felt different, like the air had settled into a new shape. Then I heard gravel, slow, careful, a single step at a time. Not circling the cabin, not pacing, approaching. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between each sound. Whoever was outside knew exactly how much noise to make, enough to be heard, not enough to be obvious. The steps stopped near the porch. I waited for the knock. It didn't come. Instead, there was a pause so long it began to feel intentional, like whoever stood there was listening for something inside. Breathing, movement, proof that I was awake. I held my breath. Eventually, the steps moved away, retreating toward the trees with the same unnatural quiet they'd arrived with. In the morning, I told myself it had been an animal. That explanation lasted until I checked the porch. There were marks in the dust near the steps. Not footprints, more like smoothed patches where weight had been shifted carefully, as if someone had stood there for a long time without moving much at all. That day, the forest felt closer. The tree line seemed tighter around the clearing, the shadows deeper even in daylight. I caught myself listening for movement that wasn't there, scanning the same sections of woods over and over. I didn't see him. That absence gnawed at me. That night, I heard him again. This time, the footsteps didn't stop at the porch. They moved along the side of the cabin, window to window, slow enough that I could follow his progress by sound alone. Gravel shifting, wood creaking faintly beneath each step. He paused beneath my bedroom window. I could hear breathing, not labored, not rushed, measured. I lay perfectly still, staring at the dark rectangle of the window, waiting for a reflection, a silhouette, anything. Nothing appeared. After a long stretch of time, the steps continued, moving away toward the back of the cabin. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. The lock on the back door had been turned. Not forced, not broken, just unlocked. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember if I'd used that door the night before. I hadn't. I never did. It opened toward the trees, and I preferred the front porch where I could see the clearing. That moment, something changed inside me. Up until then, I'd been thinking of him as someone outside my space, watching from the edges, keeping his distance. The unlocked door suggested something else entirely. That night, I didn't turn the lights off. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and listened to the cabin settle as the temperature dropped. Every creak sounded like a step. Every pop of cooling wood made my shoulders tense. The footsteps came earlier this time. They didn't hesitate at the porch. They moved directly to the back of the cabin. I heard the handle turn. Not a full attempt, just enough pressure to test it. My stomach dropped. I stayed where I was, heart hammering, listening as the handle was released slowly, carefully, as if whoever held it expected it to move. The steps retreated again, unhurried. I checked the door as soon as the sound faded. Locked. Still locked. That didn't make me feel better. It meant he knew. He knew which doors mattered. He knew where the boundaries were, and he was testing them, one at a time. The days after that blurred together. I stopped enjoying the quiet, stopped finding comfort in routine. Every task felt like preparation for something I didn't want to name. I slept less, ate less. The cabin felt smaller with each passing night. And still, during the day, the clearing looked harmless. That contradiction was the worst part. The place hadn't changed. I had. I realized then that whatever was happening wasn't about breaking in. It was about patience. And patience meant time. The night everything finally broke, there was no warning, no footsteps, no testing of locks, no movement along the walls. That absence felt deliberate. I sat in the darkened cabin long after sunset, listening to the forest do nothing. The silence was no longer empty. It felt arranged, as if the night had been set carefully into place and was waiting for me to notice. I checked the windows one by one. The clearing looked exactly the way it always had, trees standing still, shadows layered neatly between trunks, nothing out of place. And yet I couldn't shake the certainty that he was there. Not at the tree line, closer. I stayed awake until well past midnight, exhaustion pulling at my thoughts, my body begging for rest. Eventually, against my better judgment, I lay down, fully clothed, the lights still on. I don't remember falling asleep. I remember waking up. The cabin was dark. The lights were off. For a long moment I lay there, trying to convince myself I had turned them off myself, that exhaustion had filled in the memory gap. Then I heard breathing. Not outside, inside, slow, even, close enough that it blended with my own. Every muscle in my body locked. I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might give me away. I didn't turn my head, I didn't reach for anything. I listened. The breathing wasn't rushed. It didn't belong to someone hiding or panicking. It belonged to someone comfortable, someone who had time. After what felt like hours, the sound shifted. Footsteps moved softly across the cabin floor, not toward me, away. I heard the back door open, then close. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd felt before. I didn't pack carefully this time. I threw clothes into bags, left food behind, left tools, left things I'd spent months fixing and improving. The truck felt too loud as I started it, the engine cutting through the stillness like a scream. I half expected the sound to trigger movement in the trees. Nothing happened. As I drove down the mountain road, I checked the mirror constantly. I didn't see him. That terrified me, because for the first time since this had started, I didn't know where he was. The forest swallowed the cabin quickly. One bend, then another, and it was gone. I waited for relief. It didn't come. Instead, I felt exposed. The open road felt wrong after weeks of being enclosed, the sky too wide, the distance too empty. Every mile I put between myself and the cabin felt like borrowed time. I didn't stop until I reached the valley. I stayed in a motel that night, lights on, television playing low static noise, doors locked. I slept for less than an hour. In the morning, I tried to explain what had happened to myself in ways that made sense. Stress, isolation, imagination. Those explanations worked until dusk. That's when I noticed a familiar shape at the edge of the parking lot. Too still, too straight, standing just far enough away to be mistaken for nothing at all. I got back into my truck and drove. I didn't look in the mirror. I don't live alone anymore. I don't live near the mountains. But sometimes, when a room goes quiet in the wrong way, I feel it again. That sense of being timed, of being allowed. Because some people don't follow you to hurt you. They follow you to learn when you're ready to leave. And once they know that, they don't need to hurry. Story 3. The night something followed us. The moment we realized we weren't alone, nothing actually happened. No scream, no sudden movement, no clear threat. Just the quiet understanding that something had been keeping pace with us for longer than we wanted to admit. We didn't see it clearly. We never heard it speak. But from that night on, every one of us agreed on the same thing. Whatever followed us through those woods wasn't trying to scare us. It was trying to see how far we would go. We chose the campsite because it was empty. That was the selling point. No nearby trails, no marked sites. Just a small clearing deep in the forest that one of my friends had found years earlier while hiking. It wasn't official. No signs, no fire rings, just a flat patch of ground surrounded by trees. We wanted quiet. There were 4 of us, all in our mid-20s, tired of crowded campgrounds and families with generators running late into the night. We wanted the kind of isolation that made you feel like the rest of the world had temporarily forgotten you. The hike in took longer than expected. The trail disappeared about halfway, forcing us to navigate using memory and instinct. That should have been the first warning, but at the time it felt like part of the adventure. By the time we reached the clearing, the light was already starting to fade. The place looked exactly the way we remembered it, open enough for tents, surrounded by dense forest on all sides. The trees stood close together, their branches overlapping high above us, cutting off more sky than we liked to admit. Still, nothing felt wrong. We set up camp quickly, 2 tents near the edge of the clearing, one closer to the center. We gathered firewood while there was still light, stacking it higher than we normally would. Someone joked about bears. Someone else laughed it off. The forest was quiet in that familiar way that feels peaceful during the day. Birds moved through the canopy. Leaves shifted gently in the breeze. As night fell, the temperature dropped faster than expected. The fire became the center of everything. Light, warmth, orientation. Beyond its reach, the forest dissolved into shadow almost immediately. We talked for a while, nothing important, just filling the space. That's when the first sound came. A single branch snapping. Not close, not far, just beyond the firelight. We all paused, listening. No follow-up sound came, no rustling, no movement. Probably a deer, someone said. We accepted that explanation because it was easy. Over the next hour, the sounds repeated. Not constant, not frantic, occasional. A footstep here, a shift there, always from a different direction, always just outside the ring of light. Each time, the sound stopped as soon as someone turned toward it. We tried to ignore it. We kept talking, kept the fire going, kept pretending this was normal. But slowly, the mood changed. Conversations shortened, laughter faded. People began glancing toward the trees without realizing they were doing it. At one point, someone picked up a flashlight and swept it across the forest. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing trunks, branches, and nothing else. But the moment the light moved away, the sound returned. Closer. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The sounds weren't random, they were responding. When we shifted positions, the sound shifted too. When the fire crackled louder, the forest went quiet. When everything settled, it moved again. Whatever it wasn't wandering. It was adjusting. None of us said that out loud. Not yet.
By the time the fire burned down to a steady glow, the forest had gone completely dark. Not the kind of dark you can adjust to, but the kind that swallows detail. The tree line didn't fade gradually. It stopped, like the world simply ended a few feet beyond the firelight. We added more wood. The flames jumped higher, casting sharper shadows that danced across the trunks. For a moment, it felt better, brighter, safer. That feeling didn't last. The sounds returned almost immediately. Not louder, not faster, closer. Something moved along the edge of the clearing, staying just beyond the reach of the light. We could hear it step through leaves and over small branches, but never in a straight line. It circled, paused, shifted direction. I realized then that it was avoiding open space. Animals don't do that when they're curious. They wander in, test the boundary, then retreat. This thing didn't test. It respected the boundary. Someone suggested it might be more than one animal. That idea hung in the air longer than it should have. We started talking less. Instead of facing each other, we found ourselves angling our bodies outward, backs closer to the fire, eyes scanning the tree line. Without saying it, we formed a loose circle around the flames. The forest responded. When one of us stood to grab another log, the movement in the trees shifted to match it, not following exactly, but adjusting, like it was recalculating distance. We tried the flashlight again. This time, two beams swept in opposite directions, overlapping briefly before separating. The light revealed nothing but bark and shadow. The moment the beams clicked off, we heard movement from a new position, behind us. One of the tents rustled slightly as something brushed past it, not hard enough to shake it, just enough to let us know how close it was willing to get. "Okay," someone said quietly. "That's not normal." No one argued. We debated leaving then, not loudly, not decisively, just a few half-formed suggestions passed back and forth. We could pack up. It's pretty late. We can handle one night. Each suggestion died before it fully formed, because leaving meant turning our backs to the trees. Leaving meant walking away from the fire. The thing at the edge of the clearing seemed to sense that hesitation. The sounds became more deliberate. Footsteps moved from one side to the other, slow enough that we could track them by ear. When they stopped, we waited. When they started again, we adjusted our positions. At one point, I realized something that made my chest tighten. The sounds weren't circling randomly anymore. They were pacing us. Every time one of us shifted, the movement shifted too. Every time the group leaned in closer together, the sounds moved closer too. It wasn't closing the distance all at once. It was testing how much space we were willing to give up. We stopped adding wood to the fire. None of us said why, but the unspoken reason was clear. A larger fire would only make the darkness beyond it feel deeper, sharper, more defined. Eventually, the fire settled into a low, steady burn. That's when the sounds split. Movement came from two different directions at once. Not fast, not chaotic, measured.
Someone whispered my name. I looked over and saw the expression on their face, tight, focused, afraid in a way that didn't need words. They were listening to something I couldn't hear. A moment later, I heard it too. Footsteps, not in the forest, closer, too close.
The first time it crossed into the clearing, none of us said anything. We all heard it at the same time, the faint scrape of something brushing against dry grass where there shouldn't have been any movement at all. Not wind, not an animal darting through. A single step inside the light. The fire didn't flare or react. It just burned steadily, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. One of the tents shifted slightly, fabric whispering as if someone had brushed past it. Not bumped, not tested, just acknowledged. I remember thinking how careful it was being. That thought scared me more than anything else. Someone reached for the flashlight again, but another hand caught their wrist. The beam stayed off. No one said why. We all understood that light would only give it something to step away from. The forest had been content to stay at the edge when the boundary was clear. Now the boundary wasn't. The sounds multiplied, but not in volume, in direction. A step near the cooler, a rustle behind one tent, a soft crunch of leaves near the far side of the fire. We were no longer being watched from one place. We were being arranged. I felt the realization settle through the group without words. Our circle tightened, shoulders brushed, breathing grew shallow. No one wanted to be the one closest to the dark. Someone whispered, "We need to go." This time, no one argued. But leaving wasn't as simple as standing up and walking away. We were surrounded by darkness thick enough to hide depth. The trail we'd used to get in had vanished hours ago, swallowed by night and shadow. And wherever we planned to go, we would have to turn our backs to something we couldn't see. The fire popped softly, a reminder that time was still moving forward. Another step came, closer than the last. I stood first. The moment I did, the sound adjusted. Movement shifted to my left, then stopped. It was reacting. We packed in silence, hands shaking, gear shoved into bags without care. Zippers sounded too loud. Fabric tore slightly where it snagged. Each noise felt like a mistake. As soon as one of the tents collapsed, the movement responded. Closer. We tried moving together, a tight cluster stepping backwards from the firelight. The darkness pressed in immediately, swallowing our shapes, blurring the edges of the clearing. That's when the sounds followed. Not behind us, beside us, keeping pace. Branches bent without snapping. Leaves shifted without rustling. Whatever moved through the trees had learned how much noise it could make without forcing us to run. It didn't want us to scatter. It wanted us to move. Someone tripped, a quick stumble, nothing serious. The movement surged for the first time. Not a charge, not an attack, just a sudden closing of distance that made our hearts jump and our feet move faster without discussion. We didn't run. We walked fast. That mattered. Running would have turned this into a chase. Walking kept it patient. The trail, if you could call it that, reappeared in fragments. A familiar rock,
a bend between two trees, landmarks we recognized more by memory than sight. Every time we slowed, the sound grew closer. Every time we picked up the pace, it matched us. That's when the thought finally became impossible to ignore. It wasn't trying to catch us. It was seeing how we moved when we thought we were escaping. The realization hit hard and all at once. This wasn't pursuit. It was study. We reached the point where the trail should have widened, where the trees usually pulled back just enough to let the night sky bleed through. It didn't. The forest closed tighter instead, branches overlapping, shadows stacking in unfamiliar ways. The flashlight flickered on for half a second, just long enough to show that the path ahead looked wrong, compressed, rearranged. Someone whispered, "This isn't right." Behind us, the movement stopped.
No one said it, but we all felt it. The forest wasn't blocking us, it was guiding us. That realization hit slowly, like a pressure behind the eyes. Every time we tried to move in a direction that felt right, the path narrowed. Every time we hesitated, the darkness shifted closer, urging us forward along a route none of us remembered choosing. We didn't argue about which way to go. We just moved. The sounds returned the moment we stepped forward. Not rushed, not aggressive, close enough now that we could hear weight shift from foot to foot. Whatever followed us no longer bothered hiding its position. It didn't need to. Someone in the group started crying quietly, not sobbing, just breath catching, over and over again, the sound of someone trying very hard not to fall apart. We kept walking. The trail widened suddenly, almost without warning. The trees thinned just enough for the sky to show through. Stars appeared, faint, scattered, but real. That's when we saw the first sign of the road: gravel. The sound of our boots changed as soon as we stepped onto it, harder, louder. Each step felt exposed, like we were announcing ourselves. The movement behind us stopped, completely. We froze. No branches shifting, no leaves, no footsteps adjusting to ours. Nothing. The silence stretched until it felt heavier than the pursuit had been. I turned slowly, flashlight already in my hand. The beam cut back into the trees. It showed trunks, shadows, the edge of the forest standing perfectly still. No shape, no outline, no retreating movement. It was as if the woods had decided the line ended there. We didn't wait to see if that would change. We moved again, faster now, no longer worried about noise. The gravel road curved sharply, then straightened out, and finally, after what felt like far too long, we saw the dull reflection of metal. The cars. Someone laughed. The sound came out wrong, too loud, too sharp, but no one told them to stop. We unlocked doors with shaking hands and piled inside without speaking. Engines turned over one by one, the sound ripping through the night. Headlights flared. For a moment, all we could see was road. Then I glanced in the mirror. The tree line looked ordinary again. No movement, no distortion, just forest, quiet and still. Too still. We drove. No one suggested stopping. No one asked questions. The road felt endless, each mile stretching longer than the last. It wasn't until we reached the highway, real pavement, real lines, real distance, that someone finally spoke. Did anyone actually see it? No one answered. Not because we hadn't, but because none of us could agree on what it meant. In the days that followed, we tried to talk about it, tried to reconstruct the night into something that made sense. Every version fell apart under scrutiny. The details didn't line up, the order of events shifted. The only thing we all agreed on was the feeling, the certainty that whatever followed us didn't chase, it didn't attack, it didn't need to. It simply walked with us long enough to learn how we move when we think we're being hunted. And when it was satisfied, it let us leave.
Most people think the danger ends when you leave the place where something went wrong, that once you get back to a road with lights, or a house with walls, or a room with a locked door, whatever followed you stays behind. That isn't always how it works. Sometimes the place doesn't want to keep you. Sometimes it just wants to understand you. How long you hesitate, how you move when you're unsure, how quiet you become when you realize you're not alone. None of the people in these stories saw clear monsters. None of them were chased screaming through the dark. What they experienced was slower than that, quieter, more patient. A presence that didn't rush, didn't threaten, didn't need to. Because once you notice something is wrong, the place has already learned enough. If you're listening to this late at night and the world around you feels a little too still, don't assume that stillness means safety. Some things don't move because they're waiting, and some places don't trap you. They let you leave only after they're finished watching how you go. If you want to hear more stories like these, take a moment to subscribe. And if you've ever been somewhere that felt quiet in the wrong way, you already know why. Good night. Most people imagine isolation as peace. No neighbors, no noise, no one watching. But isolation doesn't erase danger. It removes witnesses. When you live far enough from roads and cities, there's no one to hear what happens at night, no one to notice patterns forming, no one to question the things you slowly accept as normal. The woods don't announce themselves. They don't rush. They don't need to. They wait. The stories in this video aren't about monsters chasing people through the dark. They're about moments where nothing happens right away. Moments where the silence lasts just a little too long, where familiar places begin behaving differently. And once you notice something is wrong, you're already part of it. Tonight's first story comes from a couple who thought they had finally escaped the world. They didn't realize something else was already there.